Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic Podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 73.
Episode 73. Ben, I've got more Morse code stuff to talk to you about.
Okay, let's hear it.
All right, so amateur radio operators and other Morse code users typically use the number 73 as kind of a shorthand for best regards or have a good one or just some generic sign-off.
I can't figure out why. I'm trying to figure out why, and I can't.
So
I'm counting numbers and...
Right. Well, in Morse code, the number 73 is a very easily recognizable palindrome. It's 2 long dashes and then 5 short blips and then 2 more long dashes.
Da-da, did-it, da-da.
Yeah, there you go. And they even, it's so pervasive, apparently, in the amateur radio community that there was an amateur radio magazine published from 1960 to 2003 that was titled 73.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this is very well known amongst that community.
Yes, so every ham radio operator we have as listeners is going to be well versed in what I'm talking about. Probably better than what I am.
Okay, well, so it's a sign-off, like happy trails kind of thing?
That is what I'm understanding.
All right. Well, 73 to you, Josh.
We're not done yet. We'll do that later.
Okay. Well, we're recording this at the end of May 2022. And we would be remiss, I think, as anyone would, to not utilize our platform for good. And there's something that's really bothering me. I hope it's bothering you too, Josh. I want to talk about mass shootings in America. So just a couple of days ago in Uvalde, Texas, an 18-year-old boy with no criminal record, no mental history, no warnings, not on the FBI's watch list, purchased an AR-15 and took it and went into an elementary school full of children ages 5 to 8 and killed 19 of them and 2 teachers. Also, since the last time recorded episode 72, there was a shooting in a church in California that may have been racially motivated. 1 was killed and 5 were injured. And there was a shooting in a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, also potentially very much racially motivated. It was very clear. And 10 people were killed and 3 were injured. So let's pick the list of places where people are not safe in America right now because of weapons designed to kill people efficiently. Grocery stores, churches, and schools. So as long as, you know what, I don't think we're safe anywhere, Josh. What are we gonna do?
And so, Ben, that's the time-old question. So there is the ideal answer that I have, at least for me. Everybody's going to have their own different answer. And then there's what's actually going to happen. I'm going to start with what's actually going to happen first. What I think is actually going to happen is that politicians on both sides of the aisle, both Republicans and Democrats, are going to use these opportunities to score political points by saying the things that they want their base to say. The left is going to say, oh, well, we're going to enact stronger gun controls. And the right's going to say, oh, well, this was a tragedy, and we are also going to enact gun controls, but only ones that make sense and enforce the ones that are already on the laws, are already on the books, and blah, blah, blah. And all these politicians are going to score points with their base, but in reality, nothing is going to happen.
I don't think that's true. And this is good. This is you the pessimist, and me the optimist. I don't see how that's possible. Something has to happen.
Well, what's going to happen is nothing. No laws are going to change. The NRA is a huge political lobby in this country, which has enormous vested interest in ensuring that there are no stronger gun controls. And we're just going to sit and spin our wheels in the public arena, yelling at each other until this fades from the public consciousness, and we'll move on until the next one happens, and then we'll all get stirred up and outraged about that one too. How many mass shootings have happened in the last year? How many mass shootings have happened in the last 5 years? How many have happened in the last 10 years? And every single time, somebody will get up in front of a microphone and say, this cannot happen anymore. We have got to make major changes, and nothing does.
So, my wife's nephew's wife is a school teacher, and she posted this really compelling post where she basically said what you just said. This can't happen anymore. And then she said, here are a bunch of things that could be done. And she made a big list across all different areas, changes to laws, changes to security, changes to safety, changes to mental health care, changes to the way that we approach these things in society. And among all those things, there's something everyone can do. You can make a phone call, you can write a letter, you can support something online, you can, vote differently, you can go to, all politics is local, as they say. You can go to your school board meeting, you can go to your town council meeting, everyone pick something and do it. And I like that. I think that we can make changes like that. Changes do happen.
Yeah, well, the proof is in the pudding, and I'm going to remain skeptical until lasting change actually does happen. I think the best thing that I saw from this, not the best thing, but one of the funnier things, is you sent me an article on The Onion, and the headline was, U.S. officials say there's absolutely no way to stop this from happening in the only country where this ever happens.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I brushed over this too quickly, Josh, but I want to tell you how emotional this was for me. I grew up, I don't know what your male emotional expressions are in your life and in the world around you, but crying is exceedingly rare in my existence. I just don't do it. And the last time I could think of where I had just openly wept at the news was when Sandy Hook happened, a decade ago in Connecticut, and those almost the same amount of kids were shot. Just utterly defenseless little children, scared out of their minds, being preyed upon by a grump. What happened to someone that's so frustrated and so fed up with the world that they're like, I'm going to leave this world? When did we add on to the end of that? And I'm going to take as many 7-year-olds with me as I can. Like, how do we end up there? How is that the place we're at now?
I mean, you can point the finger at 100 different things, but the reality is the people that do this are on the tail end of a bell curve of people that are broken in some, I would say, irredeemable way. And this is the thing, is that it is a bell curve. You can't just say like, oh, this is some psychopath and we're going to treat the psychopaths better or differently or identify them. Most of the time, you don't see this coming in advance. And if you do, how are you what are you supposed to do? Like, is the FBI supposed to raid the house of every disgruntled teenager that's in America? They won't have time for anything else.
And that's the argument that's happening right now, kind of against the gun thing. Like, this wasn't a person that had obtained a weapon illegally, that wouldn't have been found out by a background check. Like, none of the things people are proposing to do to stop this would have stopped this kid.
Exactly. So this is going to reveal more of my political leanings, Ben. But there is no reason that we should have weapons that are as deadly as they are just in circulation. You want to have a pistol to defend yourself? Fine. You want to have a shotgun to go hunting? No problem. Why do we need actual military-grade assault weapons that are for nothing but killing people? Oh, well, I go deer hunting with those. Ben, you look me in the eye, and if you've ever met a person that's a deer hunter and they have a deer head on the wall, you ask them, oh, how'd you kill that deer?
No one says AR-15.
Well, who gets more respect? The guy that said, oh, I sat in a tree for half a day and shot it with my, advanced technology. Or is it the guy, that shot it with a bow and arrow, or the one that dropped out of a tree and killed it with his knife? Who gets more respect there?
Josh, I can't remember from looking at your military uniform, but are you qualified expert on the AR-15?
No, I qualified expert in the M9, not the AR-15.
Okay. All right. So you're qualified expert on a pistol. I'm qualified expert on the rifle that is in question here, because the military has a version of this. They call it the M4 rifle, but it's the same thing.
Shorter barrel, collapsible stock.
Carbine, short barrel, collapsible stock.
It's the same action, the same gas-powered, recocking mechanism, yeah.
I have proven in a trial that I'm quite lethal with one of these. But the trial, in every way, shape, and form, was showing how to use this to kill people. Like, I was shooting at silhouettes and targets that look like people because that's what I do. I'm in the military. I don't own one of these for my own personal life. I wouldn't ever have any reason to have it. But we have those out there. Would people not having these stop every instance of this kind of stuff?
That's a logical trap. No. these things would still happen. But
I don't think it's a logical trap.
No, it's a logical trap to think like, oh, well, the gun control is not going to stop these things from happening. You're right.
That's definitely not where I was going.
All right. Well, that's where it sounded like you were going. And I hate people that say this on TV, like, oh, well, the guns aren't the problem. It's the crazy people. Well, hang on.
So I want to go back to what my niece said.
Okay.
I want these to not happen at all, ever. I don't want any more 7-year-olds to get shot. I don't want any more families to be without their children. I don't want any more teachers to have to cower in fear that some crazy person will come in and just start executing people. I remember as a kid when there used to be hostages and there was negotiations because somebody wanted something, not just death and destruction. But we can't stop all of this with one panacea, one cure-all. But there are things that we can do to stop some of them, and we need to do all of them. We need to do all the things that we can do that will stop some of this and reduce the overall number, hopefully to 0, so that this never happens again. If one person is stopped because of better mental health care, great, that's one that's stopped. If one is stopped because of lack of access to a lethal weapon, let's stop that person too. If one is stopped because of better security at a school, great, let's do that too. Let's do all the things. Let's do all the things so that no more children are executed by a grown man with a gun.
I mean, bold words, but I don't have that kind of agency. You don't have that kind of agency. Individuals in this world don't have that kind of agency. Neither one of us, if we pulled all of our resources, liquidated every dollar we have, wouldn't come close to the amount of money that the NRA pours into government lobbying. The individual has such little say in how this works at the federal level that how can we make these changes, Ben? Like, it's great to be on our platform and say this should never happen, but in reality, there's nothing we can do.
I know you're saying that these guys are statistical outliers, but nothing is wrong. Of course there's something. Imagine that there's 40,000 car accidents on the road in a year, and that you avoid some car accidents by improving the roads and improving visibility and improving, deaths on the road. You improve them by changing the safety features of the cars, and all these things add up to a difference in the outcome.
There isn't a lobby that exists that wants more dangerous vehicles. That's the problem. Is there are people that that believe to their core that having access to these so one person can be that dangerous. So one person can storm a school and execute children and teachers en masse. There are people that believe to their core that is a fundamental right in this country, that people should have that kind of lethality at their fingertips, no questions asked. So, I know what you're saying, but the analogy
you're portraying this as hopeless. And I totally disagree with that, because I think that type of thinking leads to a place where good people don't try to stand up against evil.
What am I supposed to do? It has been this way my entire lifetime. There have been mass shootings the entire almost 4 decades I've been alive.
I disagree with the way you've characterized the NRA lobby as this juggernaut that cannot be stopped. I saw a post today of the people inside the NRA conference that happened this weekend and the people outside protesting. They have a voice, and their voice will be heard. Their voice will be heard by lawmakers. It will be heard by people like you and me. I
understand. This goes back to my pessimism. I've seen this happen too many times. I've seen people make too many promises and not deliver. Until something actually happens, I don't believe it. I don't think it is.
It's gotten worse a little bit at a time until we got to where we're at now. It can start to get better a little bit at a time until we get back to 0.
I was actually thinking about this the other day and having the discussion with my wife. Like, I don't see any vehicle to make any lasting, legitimate federal level changes to the way that gun control or any of these laws happen at the federal level. But strangely enough, marijuana legality in this country gives me some hope in that, there is now a precedent for states going against federal laws and regulations to do things that people want. So maybe there's a possibility that states start to lock this down until that idea becomes normalized, and then it spreads from there. That's the only way I can see this happening.
All right, let me ask you a question. If you lived in a state where the gun lobby was very strong and they resisted any kind of change, and a neighboring state made some very drastic sweeping changes, would you consider relocating?
I mean, that's yes. Like my wife and I have talked about relocating because of just the neighborhood that we're in is so has such different ideologies than we do that sometimes we're legitimately upset about the ideas that are propagated in front of our kids from the other kids. And we've talked about moving for that. Now, but at the same time, that's a huge logistical problem. Like, you can't just packing up and moving to another side of town. That's one thing.
I get
packing
it.
up, moving to another state. That's a whole different ballgame.
So I lived in England for 3 years where, you can't even carry a knife. Like, the weapons of these kinds are completely illegal in any way, shape, or form. And these kinds of things, like you pointed out they said in The Onion, these kinds of things don't happen. There aren't mass.
Well, there are still people that
events.
are unhinged that want to go out in a blaze of glory, but what do they have? What do they have access to? In this country, if you wanted to buy an illegal weapon, you're talking about a fully automatic machine gun or a bazooka. In England, if they want to jump through the same hoops, the same level of illegality, they're going to get their hands on what? A pistol? Maybe?
A shotgun.
Yeah, even a shotgun. Comparing that to an AR-15.
The kind that you have to reload manually, double barrel at best.
That's the thing. So people that talk about like, oh, well, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That's actually not true either. This person actually went through a bunch of armed guards before he got to the children. But at the same time, like, what if nobody had guns? Oh, that's an idea.
So Australia did this. And this is what I'm talking about. Like, you can have broad sweeping changes that will have the desired result. There's lots of little things that could be done. There's big things that could be done. But just because the big things can't happen doesn't mean that we can't see positive changes.
So I know what you're talking about with Australia. They went from like open guns, like laws like we do, to no guns whatsoever, but they had to turn them in and they became illegal. Do you know what happened to the politician that spearheaded that?
No, I don't.
He basically committed political suicide. The person that wrote that legislation and pushed it through and got it passed never got reelected and never had a career in politics ever again.
Okay, that changes the subject to something else I want to talk about here. And that is people's unwillingness to take personal risks to protect others when they're in a position where they could do so. The situation in Uvalde, Texas, as it's starting to unfold, really looks like that there was a bunch of grown adults who have some, whether or not it's technically legal mandate to protect others. Regardless, there were these defenseless children being preyed upon by a man with a gun, and the people that were supposed to protect them either were unable or unwilling to, because of peril to their own lives.
And that's how do you know how you're going to respond to the situation? It's easy to go through the training. It's easy to go get qualified as an expert marksman on the AR-15 and say, yes, if the enemy is charging at me, I will have no problem shooting and killing them. But like you mentioned, the reason that when we go to shoot these targets and qualify on these weapons, the reason the silhouettes look like people is because the Army had problems in World War II with kids freezing up when the Germans were charging at them. They wouldn't shoot at them. They weren't mentally prepared to take another life, even in their own defense. And so there's no way to know ahead of time whether or not, like, what you would do in that situation. And so
I wouldn't say no way. In fact, I just listened to a podcast today where a psychologist was proposing that even doing mental exercises where you think through something in advance helps prepare your mind so that if the situation does arise, you're prepared to do the things that are harder to do because of the mental limitations.
Okay, but then
I get the idea. Like, there's no way you can know, Josh. I know. If I were there, those cops would have had to shoot me to keep me out of that school.
I mean, okay, but what do we do with that information?
So amongst the laundry list of things where we have an opportunity to change them, this feels like one of them. What is happening is that there are people that are following this cultural script, I want to say, where we've set up almost a perverse incentive for glorifying disenfranchised individuals. If you do this thing, if you go to a school and shoot some children, you're going to get a lot of attention. It's going to, I don't know how we've gotten to the place where this is what we've done, but why are people doing this?
Well, you can't propose to ever know what's going through different people's heads. Like every kid that goes and does this is going to have their own reasons and their own justifications and their own whatever brokenness in their head. Like
sound like the satire on The Onion. Hey, there's no way to stop this, says the only country on earth where it happens. Like, there is a way to stop this. We're the only place where it happens. We got to figure it out and take it and dismantle it.
Yes, it's the guns. That's what I've been talking about. You can't stop the people.
It's not the only thing.
That is the only thing. In my opinion,
no.
The only way to reduce the lethality of these incidents is to remove the people's ability to be that lethal.
I get it, but there's a lot of moving pieces in this. There's people feeling disenfranchised and having access to lethal weapons, but we can attack all of that. We can make our schools more secure. We can help people in need. We can identify people that are dangerous. There's other things that can be done. This isn't just a one-sided problem.
I recognize that. And the problem is what you're talking about right there is then the argument that the right uses to say, oh, well, we're not going to do gun control. We're going to try to help the individuals and identify and do all these other things. And it's, I get it. I understand. Yes, this is a multi-pronged problem. But you know what every single person that has done a mass shooting has in common? Regardless of their background, regardless of their upbringing, of their reasoning, their justifications, whatever. The common element amongst every single one of them is the amount of lethal force that they were able to get their hands on. And so, like, if you're going to go tackle a problem, and you think like a manager, think like a middle manager in an office.
What's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck?
Yes. What's the highest return on investment for the mass amount of resources that you're talking about throwing at this problem?
I get it, Josh. And you're like, well, and because of that, you have to go up against the NRA and you can't win, so it's hopeless. I reject that.
No, well,
yes.
Okay, so if we take your tack and we start going against the mental health and the security or whatever, we're going to spend a ton of resources.
Don't get me wrong.
I know we should go after the guns, but that's a hopeless uphill battle because there's too many people willing to die on that hill, literally. So we're going to spend huge numbers of resources to get incremental, tiny improvements that will then be argued down as wasteful in the future.
I'm not as hopeless about this as you, and I can't accept that we can't do more to stop this, and that we shouldn't. We have to.
I agree. Things should be done. That's the difference. I have that same belief that things should change, but in reality, I see no vehicle. I see no path through the current political environment that we exist in order to get to any kind of meaningful change.
Well, as I was doing some research for this and I was trying to find out some information about the others, I went to this website. I'll put a link in the show notes that just keeps a running tally of incidents of gun violence. And I was shocked. There was, ones I hadn't even heard of, and dozens. And it includes the kind that just don't make the press anymore, like a drive-by in the south side of Chicago kind of ones. But yeah.
The ones that really get me, the ones that always go to my core, is not so much the school shootings. Those are terrible and horrible. What really gets to me is the ones where it's two kids at home that find a gun that's loaded in the house somewhere, and one kills the other without understanding what they have done. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and if you wrap all of those together, this is now the number one cause of death of children.
Yay!
In America. Yeah, great. Congratulations, America. You did it.
Good job. Your Second Amendment, which was supposed to defend you against the quartering of troops back in the 1700s, is now killing all of your children.
Yeah. More than car accidents, more than cancer.
Bullets.
Yeah.
Great.
It's terrible.
Wonderful.
Okay. If I think of something better to do, I'll readdress it here in the future, but we need to move on.
Yeah, I need to move to Canada. Oh, I'm sorry. You meant topics. Yes, let's do topics.
So your background, unless that is the weirdest Skype filter I've ever seen, it looks like you're coming to me from a closet.
Yes. So I don't know where you want to start with this. Like, listeners, if I sound different,
Josh, why are you in a closet?
Why am I in a closet? Ben, I'm not coming out of this closet either. Like, innuendo.
I've come to you from a closet before, several times, but this is a first for you, I think.
This is a first for me. Normally, I'm in my pillow fort out in my like home office casita area where I hang up blankets from the ceiling, and I'm in a nice little sound dampened box that ends up being like 90 degrees by the time we're done recording. Today, I am
you have to turn off the air conditioner in Phoenix.
Yep. So today I'm coming to you from my master bedroom closet in what is probably the jankiest computer setup I've ever had. I've actually pulled out my sock drawer halfway and set the monitor into my socks. That is holding it up.
I love it. Okay, I'm putting a photo in the Facebook album of Josh's monitor in his sock drawer.
So my wife and I decided that, well, first of all, we got our workout machine that goes in that same room that I usually record from. And when we hung that up on the wall, it's a tonal and it's great and we love it. And it's so good. Such a great investment. But because of that room used to be a spare bedroom. Now it's like a full-time dedicated gym. But we had this mattress. I swear, like half of my life is spent figuring out what to do with spare mattresses that are floating around my house.
You always wonder why you find those in the middle of the highway. It's because they're so hard to dispose of.
Right.
It's worse than a dead body.
So we had an extra, queen-size mattress leaning up against the wall in there forever. And finally my wife goes, you know what, we should get a Murphy bed. And we looked into Murphy beds, and they're stupid expensive. You know what's not stupid expensive is the hardware to make a Murphy bed. So I decided that I'm going to make a Murphy bed so we can keep the mattress and still keep that room as a full-time gym and still have it as a spare bedroom in case we need it. But then, But the way these things work is it's like, okay, we're going to move some of the furniture around. Okay, so let's move this furniture out of the way so we make room for what the Murphy bed's going to be. Oh, you know what would go really well here is if we had a couple more wall hangings. Oh, that's a good idea. So we get a couple more wall hangings and hang some more stuff up. Oh, you know, you're going to be in here.
So this turned into a full remodel of your casita.
Yeah, I guess that's the short version of the story. Is now everything is off the walls. Everything is piled in the middle of the room. Nicole spent all day today painting it, and she did a wonderful job. Not only the casita, but then also the bathroom in there is now completely painted.
What's the name of the color she painted it?
The color is Cliffside Park.
Cliffside Park. Okay, don't say which color on the color wheel that is. I want to hear our listeners. What do you think? Don't Google it. What color do you think Cliffside Park is? I know because I've seen some photos of it. But if you had just said Cliffside Park to me, I might not have been able to tell you what color that was.
Fair enough. So anyway, I'm replacing a bunch of fixtures in there. We're going to do the ceiling fan, and I'm just finished day 2 of building the Murphy bed in the garage, and that's been my full-time gig this long weekend.
Wow. It boggles my mind. So we've been like living on military housing or a rented house for so long that I've kind of, it caused this desire that you seem to have so abundantly inside of me to become extinct almost. I wonder if I finally buy a house and rejoin the ranks of the homeowners, if it's still inside of me somewhere.
It is. And I can tell you, this stuff sneaks up on you. Because you move into the house, and when you first move in, you're just so happy, and everything is so new and exciting. It's like, oh, this house is perfect, I love it. And then like 2 months later, you'll be like, you know, those cabinets aren't the best color. Or like, oh, the casita is nice, but I would really like it if, you know, this bed wasn't in the way all the time. Just little things like that, and then they creep up. The longer you stay there, they creep up on your annoyance threshold until it finally breaks surface, and you're like, all right, screw it. We have to do something about this.
I feel like your annoyance threshold, as you just called it, is lower than mine, but I get it. Yeah.
So
especially when it comes to computer parts.
Oh, yeah, I did do another upgrade to the computer. Now, but that's different.
You're out of that closet, Josh.
That's completely different. That's like a hobby. And so anytime I get to tinker, any excuse I get to open it up and just mess with it for a couple hours, I'll do that.
All right, so what would you call that threshold then?
For my computer?
Yeah, it's not an annoyance threshold. What is it?
Oh, that's That's a hobby threshold. I don't know. Like if I figure out something I can do to tinker with it, then I'll sit and research it for like a week. Like it gives me something to do. This is what hobbies do in my brain, Ben, and this is why I have so many of them, is they fill up the idle compute cycles in my mind between when I'm actually thinking about different things.
Yeah, I've been giving a lot of those to disc golf lately, but I know what you mean.
Right. And so you have a handful of hobbies, and then I'll be driving somewhere and get in my head, you know what? That 2 terabyte hard drive in my computer is great and all, but I wish it was just a little bit faster with the load times. I wonder how feasible it would be to replace that with an M.2. And so they start researching different SSDs and how you can clone it and what the upgrade path is going to be and if you PCIe 3 versus 4. And it gave me a good 2 weeks of research to just, fill up my idle cycles.
That sounded like it could have been a technobabble scene out of Star Trek The Next Generation, but everything you said was completely technologically valid.
I'll say the current thing that is now filling up my idle cycles when it comes to computer stuff is a home NAS, network attached storage. I'm going to at some point implement basically a shared drive in our house.
So I feel like the success of a home-based network attached storage is the software that's utilized to take advantage of it. Like if your kid on their iPad could just watch a movie without having to think about the facts that they're using a network attached storage, then you've won.
So,
and that's about integration.
Yeah, and I'm not planning on doing I think that's called like a Plex server or a multimedia server. I'm not even talking about that. Yeah. I just want to have another place to store every one of our millions of digital photos in case, one of our computers melts down.
Okay. Yeah, I get that. Do you also pay for or consume some kind of cloud-based backup solution?
I used to when I owned a business, but no longer. I don't know. I don't have enough of that. Photos, honestly, are the only digital records, and maybe tax stuff. That's the only long-term records that I want to make sure that I have multiple copies of in different places. And so I've never broken the threshold of however much free storage you get on Google Drive or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so you do have a cloud-based backup solution. I feel like we need to go back to the beginning of this episode and get some sponsors. Tonal Home Gym, Google Drive.
Sponsor the podcast, all of you.
Murphy Beds. Come on, folks.
Listeners, if you're hearing my voice and we have mentioned your product, reach out to us. We are more than happy to sell out.
All right, Josh. Speaking of selling out, I want to sell out really hard right now.
Okay.
This weekend marks the release of the film Top Gun Maverick.
Oh, dear.
A legacy sequel, as they call it, 34 years after the original came back. Was the movie Top Gun at all an influence in your going into the Air Force?
Top Gun, no. Top Gun did not influence me into going to the Air Force because at that time I knew that I hated flying.
Okay. All right. Because I don't think it's an overstatement to say that this has become such a cultural touchstone, including all of the memes and the clips and all those kinds of things, that the movie Top Gun has kind of earned its place in the pantheon, even if it's not a great film, of just being something that everyone is culturally aware of to some point.
I will talk about Top Gun later on in this episode.
So I'm not going to give a spoiler review, but Josh, I was waiting for this movie to come out like I haven't waited for a movie to come out since maybe the Avengers Endgame. Like, that's how excited I was for this movie to come out.
Oh, Ben,
I wanted to see it so bad, I went without my wife. I'm just like, I'm going to see Top Gun today. I did this yesterday. I'm going to see Top Gun today. Is anyone coming with me? And my 3 youngest kids came with me, and we went and had a blast.
I'm sure you were going to say, I'm going to go to Top Gun. Does anybody want to come with me? No? Okay, thanks. Bye. And then the door shuts all in one motion.
It was close. That almost happened. But my kids all ran out because they know me.
So you had super high expectations going into a movie. And Ben, I feel like we've been down this road before. Dude, you have got to have lower expectations for film.
My expectations were so high, and it exceeded them in every way. Like, I didn't even know how good this movie could be. It blew my mind. It was like the roller coaster that you get off of where you never felt that painful feeling. It just felt like a thrill every minute. It was so focused. It just drove. It never lagged, even though I think it was over 2 hours long. It was exhilarating. It was uplifting. It was, oh my gosh, it was fantastic. I can't recommend it strong enough. Listeners, you're going to get this while it's still in theaters. Go see it. Do yourself a favor. Go to the biggest screen possible you can find. Take your friends and just go have a great time at the movies. I'm going again. I can't wait to go again.
Tom Cruise, sponsor the podcast.
Tom Cruise, come be a guest. You can be our first interview. You'll be on the podcast. We'll talk about your movie. I loved it so much. I can't. It was great. It had some of my favorite moments ever in film. It had this training. Okay, there was this scene where he ran up against a bunch of bureaucracy, and they did a really good job of making you feel like he'd just been painted into an absolute corner. Like there's no way out. I cannot overcome the bureaucracy. I love the idea in cinema how you think of a fighter pilot as like a rogue and a jock, but you and I both know that a fighter pilot has an absolute army of people behind him.
Yes.
That are refueling the jet, that are maintaining the jet, that are doing all of the things that have to happen, or that thing is just a $27 million worthless piece of junk.
Yeah. Gone are the days of World War II where the pilot would go out with a wrench and work on his own airplane. That doesn't happen.
Right. Or you could just run out to the airfield and put some gas in it and take off. Like the amount of support and agreement you need from a whole bunch of other people before you can take a jet really matters. So when the guy in charge says, you're not going anywhere in that jet, maybe in the past you're like, oh, okay, well, I'll just sneak out to the airfield and take one anyway. Like, yeah. Anyway, there's a moment in this movie that's like that, and I was sitting there in my seat in absolute despair, like, oh no, what is he gonna do? And then it happened, and it was so great, and I just wanted to cry. I cheered, I laughed, at one point I was clutching my hat so tightly that my fingers were hurting, and I looked down at my hands. I was shaking. I came out, and I was just like, man, that was great.
So, Ben, do you feel like you really resonated, or this movie resonated with you, and you liked it so much because you find yourself tied down by government bureaucracy 24/7?
Maybe. That's part of it. There's so many great things about it. It's about the Navy. It's not about the Air Force. But yeah, it's kind of also about just how do you stay relevant when you're old and think the old way and the world is changing around you. It's about making friends. It's about reconciling with the past. It's about letting go. Oh, man, it was so great. I loved it so much. Go see Top Gun Maverick in theaters, people, if I haven't made this point. Okay, that's all I have to say about that.
Thanks, Forrest. We appreciate your insight. I'll have to go see this movie.
It's time for Bad Logic.
Yes.
And because it's an odd episode of the Bad Imagine podcast, I believe it's your turn to give us a bias.
I was able to salvage your bias is cards, the gift that keeps on giving, you like to say. And so our bias today, Ben, is the placebo effect.
Ooh,
I think a lot of people are familiar with this idea, but I'm going to read from the card anyway. If you believe you're taking medicine, it can sometimes, quote, work, end quote, even if it's fake. And so this doesn't... I
don't think that's written strongly enough.
It's really not. Like, this doesn't just apply to actual medicine, though that's where you typically hear it. When they do, like, clinical trials and things, they will tell everybody in the trial that they are getting the medicine, but some people are actually not. They're getting sugar pills. And then that's how they can track, like, the improvements of person X who is getting the medicine against person Y who's getting the placebo. But person Y will swear up and down that they feel better because they think they're taking medicine.
Okay, I'd like to point out that this is not called the placebo bias. It's like a lot of our biases are called. This is called the placebo effect.
That's a good way to illustrate it. Like, this is a thing that happens that is scientifically, quantifiably demonstratable.
Yes, and there's medical studies that show if you give somebody something and you tell them it's going to help them, it actually does, which kind of shows the power of the mind to heal the body. But the placebo effect can be very real. One of my favorite examples of it comes from the movie Dumbo. where Dumbo has those giant ears and he learns to fly, and the mouse tells him that it's the magic feather that lets him fly, and then of course he falls from the tower and loses the feather, and then the mouse has splat, they already hit the ground. No, he has 1 second basically to convince Dumbo that he was in the power of the placebo effect and he actually didn't need the feather at all.
For like 1 second, I thought you were going to give like a legit real world example of the placebo effect in like a real context. And
I'm sure I could Google some studies, but that didn't feel like the right thing to do.
And instead, you gave me a reference to a very horribly racist movie. Thanks, Ben. Good job, buddy.
Hey, listen here with your presentism. Dumbo was one of the favorite movies of my youth.
We're going to talk about that later.
What did you have to say about the placebo effect?
I was just going to point out that this doesn't just exist in the field of medicine. This does also exist in the cognitive realm, in the logical realm, whenever you're having discussions or talking to people. For example, we are going to get a ton of placebo effect like discussions from politicians about gun control in the near future, where they're going to talk a big talk just to make everybody feel better about everything that's happening. But in reality, nothing is really going to change or happen.
I have such a hard time listening to you say this because I don't think there are people out there that really or are willing to sacrifice 7-year-olds on the altar of the Second Amendment. I think they want change too. We got to all agree on this.
There are people that are more incentivized to keep the status quo than to change, even with the 7-year-olds being killed.
Oh. There was one of I saw this in the news, and I don't have a lot to say about it. I'm just bringing it up. There was one of the parents of the children that died who was very publicly and very outspokenly one of these people you're talking about. He idolized Kyle Rittenhouse.
Okay. I mean, that changed one person's mind. That changed his mind.
Yeah.
There's a whole institution that he's got to change now.
Okay, well, the placebo effect, I don't know how we got back on gun control from the placebo effect.
What a downer.
But the placebo effect is a bias. I guess you could either acknowledge when it's taking place or use it in your favor.
If you're trying to make an argument, or you're trying to like just pad out and like you're not actually going to do anything, but you want to make people give the impression that you're going to do something, you can use the placebo effect to your benefit. On the flip side, be aware of when people are saying things that aren't real. Like, oh, what did he actually promise? What did this person actually say that they're going to do? Or what is this person actually doing versus what they are saying? That can all be placebo effect.
Okay. I think that's a good way to kind of fulfill the role that we believe the Bad at Logic segment does here, that helps our listeners and us become better critical thinkers so that we can think through the situations that we face in life.
And listeners, I don't know if you realize this, but if you point out all of the instances where Ben and I use logical fallacies and biases during the podcast, you actually win more internet points. So please jump into the discussion.
All right, Josh, for Bad English today, I want to tell you a story. There was something I learned about in the UK. It's one of those cultural things that's a very big deal for them, but just doesn't kind of have the level where it reaches this side of the pond. Have you ever heard of the BBC Proms?
I've heard of the BBC, and I have heard of Proms. Two separate things. I've not heard of BBC Proms.
Yes, promenades or BBC Proms. This is something that started in the UK in the year 1895. It was just this big, not in the same way that we do it, but like patriotic concert where they gather together an orchestra and a choir and a bunch of people in fancy clothes, and everyone listens to this choir, and it tends to be during the time of year and kind of patriotically oriented or of that nature. Well, they didn't really have a good song for it other than in fact, England doesn't even have a national anthem. The UK does, and it's God Save the King, or in this case, God Save the Queen. But they were looking for another song, and so someone wrote one. I forget the guy's name. Edward Elgar. So I was in the UK and I heard this song and it sounded familiar to me because we used the same song for a completely different purpose. The song is called Land of Hope and Glory.
Okay.
The chorus goes, "Land of hope and glory, mother of the free, how shall we extol thee who are born of thee? Wider still and wider shall thy bounds be set. God who made thee mighty, make thee mightier yet." And the tune it goes to is the tune from the Promenade of Pomp and Circumstance, March number 1. Which is the song
for graduation song.
It's the song that we use in graduation ceremonies. and so I heard it, and I'm like, "That's a graduation song." And my British friends are like, "What?" I'm like, "That's the song that we play." But they're like, "Do you sing the words?" I'm like, "No, there's no words.
There's no words." I thought that was a Philip J. Sousa song. That's just a big band marching song.
Yeah, it's just a movement from Suite by Edward Elgar, and when we play it, it doesn't have any words, but we stole it from them, and it was originally intended with words, and it's a British song of patriotism that's sometimes brought up on a short list of potential national anthems for England. I'll play a little clip of it here, and the listeners can get a taste of Land in Hope and Glory with words sung to it. It's kind of weird if you've just grown up watching seniors walk across the stage and get their diploma to it.
Okay, yeah, if it had words, that would be very strange. I don't think I'd listen to it.
Yeah. Okay, Josh, so last time on the Bad at Magic podcast, we took a suggestion from a listener and reviewed Trejo, My Life of Crime Redemption in Hollywood, by a memoir of the life of Danny Trejo. And I had pointed out that in the course of it, he mentioned how while he was in prison early on in his life, he found hope and grounding in a couple of films that Hollywood had produced, specifically The Wizard of Oz and Hunchback of Notre Dame. I'm assuming he means the 1939 version, because that's the same year that Wizard of Oz came out, and that would have timed appropriately for about the time that he would have been in or coming out of prison.
Well, it would be really weird if he was talking about the 1990s animated film from Disney.
Well, you'd be surprised. If you look at IMDb for The Hunchback of Notre Dame, I don't know why, because it didn't span the generations, but that movie has been remade like 15 times, and there's even some naughty versions. So, like, there's a lot of versions of The Hunchback of Notre Dame out there.
Must be public domain.
Rule 34. Possibly. He talked about how those movies gave him hope and made him think of better times and helped ground him. And then when he got out, he was interested in doing that same thing for other people. Kind of led to his career in Hollywood. So I had mentioned to you, I think for episode 73, that we should do this for ourselves. Talk about the movies that we watched when we were kids and talk about their significance to us.
Yes. And I think it was a good suggestion because I had an English teacher, mind you, in college make the expression, films are the novels of our time. And I really like that as an excuse not to read novels and watch films instead. It just goes to speak to, like, we consume so many films on average compared to books. Like, you really have to go out of your way to consume books, but films, people watch films all the time. And there's no doubt in my mind that I have been heavily influenced by several important films that I watched at critical points in my childhood.
I don't know. I heard this great question. It's one of the philosophical questions of the internet, like in an airplane takeoff on a treadmill. And it was, are there more wheels or are there more doors?
In what context? Like a car?
No,
has...
that's all. That's all. Are there more wheels or are there more doors? And every time you think you're zeroing in on the answer, then you think of exceptions, and it just goes on and on and on.
In the aggregate, I would say there are probably more doors than wheels on the planet.
You're thinking it. You're coming to a conclusion too quickly. Trust me, it's capable of going on. Now, the question I want to ask is, have I read more books or have I watched more movies? And I'm not so sure I know, but I will say that I am much more likely to rewatch a movie than I am to reread a book.
Interesting.
So a lot of these on my list are ones that I've watched many, many times.
Okay, I'm sorry. I got sidetracked there because you're right. More and more of my brain is being dedicated to how many wheels versus doors are in my house. And I need to shut that process down so I can actually focus on the bit that we're doing in the podcast.
Even if you think about a car, you're like, well, a car's got 4 doors, but it also has 4 wheels. So, but it also has a steering wheel. Oh, but it also has a trunk. It just goes on and on.
Well, I was just thinking about, I've got so many doors in my house, but wait, I'm sitting on a chair that has 6 wheels, and my car has 4 wheels, and there's probably wheels on some of the tools in my garage, but I have multiple doors. There's smaller doors on other things. And like I said, more and more of my brain was being...
there's also the gas door that opens up so that I could... Oh, but then there's a wheel that covers it. Yeah, it just goes on and on.
It was a runaway mental process that I just had to turn off.
Sorry, I brought it up.
There are listeners that are going to wreck their car if they don't stop thinking about wheels and doors. Listeners, stop. Focus on what we're talking about now.
So Josh and I took some time and we made lists. There's some obvious ones on here that are kind of cultural touchstones. And then there's ones that are probably lesser known just because there are those little things that for whatever reason become part of your family's meme. They enter into your circle and you adopt them, you quote them, you watch them together. And I think I have a lot like that on my list. What I've made, my list is almost 100 films. I narrowed it down to about 20 I want to talk about, and about 10 of those I'd like to recommend. And my recommendations are films that are probably lesser known, and I'd like to appeal to the audience to maybe check them out.
So I worked at this problem in a different direction. Is I thought about in a more general sense, like how films have influenced me as I was growing up. And there's a handful of specific things that happened, or like developmental phases of my childhood or my life or whatever. And I found a handful of films that directly influenced that stage of development in me.
Ooh, I like it. Okay, so do you want to do chronologically, and we'll kind of start from the oldest ones, the earliest we can remember?
Ooh, that won't work for me because I can't, chronological. It's all just in the before times. I don't know. I watched these movies so many times back in the day.
Well, then let's do our usual kind of ping pong approach. So you start.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to start kind of light, and I'm going to talk about a movie that really solidified my love for sci-fi when I was a younger boy. Okay. So my grandparents actually lived in a very small town in northern Arizona that didn't have a lot going on for it. And so if we weren't out playing in the actual desert, we were inside, doing things that kids do. But these are my grandparents, so they didn't have any toys. They didn't have any consumer electronics. They were my grandparents. But there was this one little, one-room video store that they had, and they would always take us there anytime we stayed for the weekend and let us pick out a movie. And I remember finding only one VHS that I liked out of that whole place. And it was a movie called Robot Jox, made in 1989.
Robot Jox. Oh, my gosh.
You know this movie?
Yes, I didn't see it until later, but I remember it was so campy, Josh.
Yes. Well, I was a little kid, Ben. All of the U.S. versus USSR Cold War stuff flew right over my head. And The only thing I was watching it for was 200-foot robots punching each other in the face. And I could not get enough of it.
All right. I could see why that VHS cassette appealed to you. I think that's why I got it, but I watched it once, and the dialogue was so campy, and the plot was so wooden that I was just like, okay, that wasn't a good movie.
Listeners, if you've never seen Robot Jox, they remade it recently. It's called Pacific Rim. It's basically the same
Pacific Rim was fantastic. I loved that
movie. Pacific Rim has better visuals, but it's the same level of stupid.
No.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
No, Pacific Rim would kick Robot Jox' butt.
Oh, please. Pacific Rim. We've got to have 2 pilots that sync up in their mind because the human brain
that just created a nice plot tension.
Because the human brain can't handle the complexity of moving 2 arms and 2 legs at the same time. Pacific Rim was so dumb. Every time I watched...
No, Josh. Robot Jox was so dumb. Pacific Rim was fine.
Robot Jox made no, attempt to be more than it was. Robot Jox was 100% new.
Okay, I will give you that. Yes. If you came because you wanted to see 100-foot robots punching 100-foot robots, you got what you signed up for.
I watched a clip on YouTube before we recorded today, and Ben, the special effects are so
really
cringe.
Bad.
Oh, yeah. But I still recommend it. It's a great movie.
Was it guys in plastic suits? Was it claymation? Was it bad CG? What was it?
So the actual robots fighting was bad stop-motion animation. And they have, like, this is the part that threw me, because the stop motion animation, you can't disguise that. It is what it is. It always looks a little choppy, a little grainy. But they had people in bleachers that were watching these robots fight, and they would show scenes where they would, like, stand up and cheer with their arms waving with the robots in the background. And the rotoscoping, like, you can see giant outlines of every single person, like, where they had, somebody went in and had to cut out, like, the frames with, like, scissors to, like, stitch those two shots together.
Wow.
It was so bad.
Okay. But young Josh didn't mind. You got
no. Those were, like, peak special and visual effects back in the day. And from that day forward, like, my imagination just went wild with the sci-fi nonsense, like, oh, these cool giant robots. That's so amazing.
Okay, so you said that came out in 1989?
Yes, it did.
Okay, so I'm about 7 years older than you, so I want to give one that filled the same role for me, and that was Tron. It came out 7 years before Robot Jox, and it was set in, like, it took humans and digitized them and sent them into the computer world and turned their existence into a video game.
I did watch the original Tron when I was a kid. That I saw that was on your list, so I didn't bring that one up specifically. But yes, how cool is Tron? Now, that said, Tron is so cool. Also so campy. Like, yes. Tron is also ridiculous. The dialogue is deplorable. The special effects are laughable at best. Greetings, program.
Oh, man. That just gave me a thrill of nostalgia. Maybe there's a line from Robot Jox like it, but I don't know what it was. I watched Tron so many times. It drags in places. It doesn't stand up really well, but man, it did some pioneering things it had such visual flair, inspired spin-off video games. It shaped the sci-fi world. It was amazing.
It was a cool movie. I will not deny that, but it's like watching it as an adult, it doesn't hold up.
I can still watch it. Okay, so what's next on your list?
Oh, okay. So next is a movie that came out while I was in high school. And this movie kind of messed me up a little bit. All right, so when I was in high school, I was one of the nerd kids. Like, I was in the AP classes, and I had the same handful of friends. And, like, I played sports and things, but I never really hung out with the sports people. I always hung out with the nerds. And the movie that came out that I watched, that it made me question, like, am I doing high school right? Is, like, my high school experience is nothing like this. Am I doing it wrong? And that movie was Varsity Blues.
Huh.
You ever see that movie? You
played on, like, the football team in high school and stuff like that.
I did,
If I saw it, it was only once and I forgot, so refresh my memory.
It was Jason Vanderbeek, the Beak. And he was the backup quarterback on the high school varsity football team in Texas, where football was everything. But then the first-string quarterback hurt himself, and then he gets skyrocketed in popularity. But he's kind of anti-authority and goes against the coach's wishes, and, like, it turns into this big battle between the coach just wants to win in recognition at the cost of the kid's health, but he doesn't care, and he just wants to do what's best for, like, him and his friends. And they have all these great high school adventures. Their health class teacher, who was a very good-looking woman, ended up being a stripper that they saw at the strip club.
Okay, I've never seen this movie.
Well, that's the thing. Like, they have all these high school adventures. At one point, he's in a girl's house, and the girl, like, strips naked off camera and walks back in with just whipped cream covering all of the important bits. And I'm watching this film going, I'm doing high school wrong. If this is what high school is supposed to be, I'm not doing it right.
Okay, I think this is a great time to do kind of a timeout and talk about, like you said, movies are the novels of our time. So, if you look back hundreds or even thousands of years, there's always something that fills this role in society. You've got myths and fables and stories and tales. You've got cartoons and novels, and now we have this modern representative, this moving picture that's kind of refined down into a form where it's roughly 90 to 150 minutes in length, and it tells a story. And those stories we use to inspire us, to make us laugh, to challenge us, to help us develop empathy. They entertain us, they console us, they define us. We use them to explore difficult ideas. Sometimes they're just throwaways. Sometimes they're visions of the future. So in this case, you're talking about one made by a bunch of grown-ups going back and basically playing out in the sports context the fantasy of what they wish their high school lives had been like.
That's exactly what it was. It was objectively like a series of loosely associated vignettes of how high school could have been more awesome.
Yeah. We got this hero that is sticking it to the man. He's doing things his own way, and even though he wasn't the coach's choice, he ends up saving the day and getting the girl, and all these cathartic things that a high school boy would watch and think, wow, that's really great.
And Billy Bob cried because he's a bit of a crier. Like, I can still quote most of that movie. I've seen it so many times.
Yeah, so this wasn't on my list, but I think the one that kind of filled that same role for me was Remember the Titans with Denzel Washington.
Oh, all your movies are going to be way more wholesome than mine, aren't they?
Yeah, there was definitely no one wearing whipped cream on their birthday suit.
Whipped cream bikini is what it was called, referenced in the film, and like set the precedent.
Oh man. Okay. So probably one that fills that role for me was Clueless. That came out my senior year of high school, and it provided my first celebrity crush. I mean, yeah, I saw girls that I thought were cute in movies before, but Alicia Silverstone was I absolutely crushed on her, like in the hardest way.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a signed headshot of Alicia Silverstone, don't you?
Yeah, you had to bring that up.
Didn't you marry somebody named Alicia? Like, this is a serious problem you might have, buddy.
Well, the film itself was, accomplished, but it had a great cast. Paul Rudd, I think, looks the same today as he did when he filmed Clueless, 25 years ago. But it was a dramatization of the timeless story of Emma by Jane Austen, and set in modern Beverly Hills. So it was this amalgamation of lots of interesting things. What are rich people's life like? What's it like in Beverly Hills? And this kind of timeless story that our protagonist goes through. Brittany Murphy's character was fantastic, and the father was great. And it's just a great story. I love it. I still love it today. I watch it with my kids and just enjoy that movie like I did back in 1995.
Clueless is a good movie. People, if you haven't seen Clueless, go watch it.
All right, what else you got?
Okay, so now I've got a couple of movies I want to bring up as... So when I was growing up, our household was very... at least from my perspective, and this, I'm not trying to dig on my parents. They are listeners. Mom, Dad, you guys did great. No, nothing bad is being implied by what I'm going to say. But I felt like it was very macho. Like the men were supposed to be real men. Like, crying is only appropriate at funerals in the Grand Canyon, and that's it. And so, and we watched a lot of really hardcore actiony guy movies that just really reinforced, this kind of thing. And so the first one, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to say the entire Die Hard trilogy. The first three, I'm not counting any ones after that, but like Bruce Willis, Die Hard 1, Die Hard 2, and Die Hard with a Vengeance. Like, those, just set the bar and the precedent. Like, this is what a man is supposed to be. And it was just Bruce Willis, this off-duty cop, just kicking butt left and right. And that was it. Like, it was just glorious.
He was the wrench in the machine. If he wasn't there, the bad guys would have got away with it.
We watched the third one, Die Hard with a Vengeance, so many times, Ben. I can replay that movie scene for scene.
I love that movie.
Mind.
I watched it with my kids just within the last year, and it was as good as I remember.
There is a scene in that movie, and this, I'm going to get really, really detailed about it, but it was Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson were tied up, and the terrorists had caught them, and they were strapped to this giant bomb, and they were trying to figure out how they could pick their handcuffs and get out of there. Bruce was like, "Oh, can you use a big shard of the metal cable that we slid down 2 scenes ago?" He's like, "Yeah, why?" And then Bruce Willis ripped this giant wire that was sticking out of his shoulder, and he ripped it out with his teeth. And then he's going to spit it into Samuel L. Jackson's hand so he can pick the lock. And with his teeth together, he goes, "Don't drop this mother effer." And Ben, I don't know why, but anytime in my entire adult life I am handling something that is fragile, that something that if I drop it, it will break,
I hear Bruce Willis talking to you through his teeth.
I hear Bruce Willis's voice in my mind with his teeth clenched. "Don't drop this mother effer."
Okay, that movie is a classic. I love it. You were reminding me of something in my life that's interesting, and that is my entire youth and childhood up till the time when I was about 17 years of age. I lived under a very strict no rated R and most no PG-13 movies moratorium. Like everything on my list is like G or PG.
You are missing the better half of the spectrum of film, my friend.
So I've since seen all the Die Hard movies, and I love them for what they are. Like you said, just kind of this fable with John McClane as the everyman who stops the bad guys when the system wasn't going to.
Okay, quick tangent. Die Hard, the original one, Nakatomi Plaza. Christmas movie or action movie?
I love this debate. And I am not going to register an entry right now in the debate.
Fair enough.
Okay. Let's see. What one kind of feels that role for me? So I enjoyed the action genre, the adventure genre, and probably what was the closest I could get to when I was a kid for me was the Indiana Jones trilogy.
Ooh, classics.
Yes. So that was what cemented Harrison Ford in my mind as like just the ultimate Hollywood movie star. You know, he was kind of enough like a everyman that it felt like it, but also he could just get out of anything and do anything. And he was fearless, and he got the girl, and he just, oh man, they're such great adventures. He travels the globe and handles priceless relics, but still, jumps out the window to get away from his boring office work.
Man, I'll tell you, Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is the classic Indiana Jones movie, but I watched that as a kid, and that actually falls into one of my other categories that I have, and that is movies that have made me irrationally afraid of certain film genres. And Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of those. Because like it's almost there's like one scene where it turns into a sneaky horror film that I can't handle.
What, when he falls into the temple surrounded by snakes?
Oh no, I don't care about that. Like I grew up in Arizona, man. Snakes were a reality of every day. No.
Okay.
Talking about the very end where he's tied to that pole and he figures out that they're not supposed to look at whatever comes out of the Ark of the Covenant. And then all of the body horror that happens to everybody around them. The dude whose face melted off and the person's head exploded.
Steven Spielberg went to great lengths to do some stop motion animation or whatever.
Yes.
Where the guy's face melts.
I watched Die Hard as a kid. I watched Armageddon as a kid. All these rated R hardcore action movies, people dying left and right, whatever. Mindless, senseless action does not bother me. But boy, howdy, you get to the end of that movie and that dude's face melted off, that stuck with me.
Well, I bet if we ever found the Ark of the Covenant, we could count on you not to look when we opened it.
I'm not opening that. You guys are psychos. I know how this ends.
Well, I just taught my seminary class about that. It's right out of the Bible. Okay, so I want to give another action movie that's lesser known, and I can't say I recommend this one, but I want to talk about it. It was called Condor Man. Have you ever heard of Condor Man?
Condor Man? No, I don't think I have.
Okay, Condor Man is an action movie from the mid-'80s. I've read a bunch of meta stuff about it, and it kind of fell in this weird spot where Disney was trying to branch out and try new things, and they wanted to create like an action franchise. And the protagonist is a comic book artist who has a character named Condor Man, and they're trying to stop, like you said, kind of these vague, like Cold War Russian baddies. And the CIA approaches him and wants him to help with their operation, and they turn all of his fantasies from his comic books to real life. They build him his speedboat and his action car and his glider, and he ends up going on this adventure where he, gets to team up with this exotic Russian girl who's a double agent, and he gets to build his wingsuit and jump off of a building and fly and have a laser battle with speedboats and drive down winding mountains in the Alps in this fantastic looking rocket car. It just filled all of it to me was what Rocket Jox I think was to you, or Robot Jox was to you.
Just checked all those boxes of like, yes, this is the highest form of entertainment. No one can change my mind.
I wanted to show it to my kids, so I tracked it down on the internet and we watched it, and it didn't stand up. It was campy and silly and not great.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
But I loved it when I was a kid. All right, what else you got?
So I'm going to stick with my movies that emotionally scarred me and made me afraid of certain things to this day as a grown man. And this next movie holds a very special place in my heart because it really screwed with me when I was a kid. But I've watched it so many times and I love it so much. Like, I've kind of gotten over the scary part of it. Okay, this movie is called Tremors. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's set in it probably looked a lot like your hometown because it's kind of set in the American Southwest.
Yeah, it's set in this podunk like Southwest deserty town where like people were all spread out. And I grew up in the suburbs of Phoenix where it was just like desert as far as the eye could see across the street from my house. And it's about giant monsters that live underground that were sucking people down and would just eat them whole. And this movie came out in 1990, and I recall very clearly I was 5 or 6 years old, and I couldn't sleep, and I heard my parents watching a movie in the other room at the other end of the house, and I got up and I went out there like I can't sleep, and my dad goes, "Oh yeah, come watch with us," and I watched Tremors.
No, he did not.
Had
he seen it before?
I have no idea. I don't know the background of that.
Okay, I'm putting a pin here, and we'll come back to it. Finish your story.
But yes, so as a 5 or 6 year old kid that lived in the desert, I watched a horror movie, a very well-developed horror movie, about giant monsters that lived underground in the desert.
And who can dig underneath the ground faster than a man can run.
I'm going to say apologies to my brother right now, because the only thing that got me through a handful of sleepless nights worrying about Tremors coming to eat me was the fact that I slept on the top bunk of a bunk bed and they were going to get my brother first.
That's awesome. Okay, so I got to ask you, had your dad seen it before and he decided it was okay, or he hadn't seen it and he decided it was okay? I want to know.
I don't know. I've never had the conversation with him, but knowing what I know about him, I think he probably was like, it'll be fine. Like, he's a kid, it'll be fine.
Okay, wow. Yeah, but you never know. It feels like a kid's mind just has an empty slot for the thing that's going to be in my nightmares, and it doesn't matter what it is. It could be anything. Something's going to go in that slot. Even if you... It's like Ray calling the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Like, somebody's going to think of something. It's not going to go unfilled. The traveler will come.
Now, like I said, that was the movie that freaked me out as a kid. And I have since watched it like at least a dozen times. It has some of the best quotes in film. It is still great. Super campy. Yeah. But now, as a grown-up, I love it.
It's the campy kind of movie that stands up.
I really like that movie. And I think it's one of the better monster movies in developing the lore of the monster within the movie organically to the situation. They don't have to mention, they don't have to go out of their way and say how it smells bad every time, but they do. And I appreciate those little details. But, so my irrational fear of Tremors going to come eat me has been replaced by other things and other movies that freaked me out later on.
I'm trying to think what gave me my nightmare fuel as a kid. I did have one, but I didn't take the time to put it on this list. So I'm gonna go in a different way here. And so as a kid, I didn't see any of the Star Wars movies in theaters. The original came out the year I was born. And it was just called Star Wars. You know, it wasn't called A New Hope yet. And then Empire Strikes Back came back when came out when I was like 6. And then Return of the Jedi came out. I didn't get to see that in theaters, but once they were all out, we got them on video cassette, and I wore those cassettes out. I watched them so much I knew the dialogue by heart.
I think my parents went on their first date and saw the original Star Wars movie. So that's pretty, that just shows the generation gap right there. But same, like we had the VHS tapes, and any time that there was spare TV time, which there wasn't in my house because of the people that lived there. But man, I'll tell you what, I knew what I was going to slam in the VCR and try to watch like 10 minutes of.
Oh yeah. And I wouldn't say that like I was scared of Darth Vader. Like I didn't have nightmares about him, but he was the ultimate baddie as far as I was concerned.
Have you gone back and rewatched the original like trilogy?
I don't know. It's hard in my mind how many times I've consumed that story to figure out the answer to that question. The last time I've definitely watched them within the last decade.
I will say that, like, I'm agreeing with you. Darth Vader is an excellent, like, villain and a great bad guy. But there is the scene where he fights Obi-Wan Kenobi with a lightsaber in the original movie, scene 38. It's so bad. This was before Hollywood figured out that they could do choreography.
Wait, you just called it by a name. You called it scene 38. What does that mean?
So I know that because there is a YouTube video where one guy recreated scene 38 with more modern day visual effects and modern day like choreography for a lightsaber force battle between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, and it's great.
I kind of like this thing that the internet says, we've consumed this story together as a people. We've all agreed that it fills a major part of our lives, but it's a little bit deficient, so let's try to fix it. But that's also the same kind of nonsense that got George Lucas into this endless revisionism over like 4 or 5 different re-releases of the original trilogy, where he just made them worse and worse and worse. I think there's something to be said for the original kind of wooden, lifeless fencing that they did in the first filming of the Obi-Wan Darth Vader battle.
No, let's be clear. I'm not saying we should go back and rewrite the original trilogy with modern day like graphics and visual effects and choreography or whatever. No. But it is interesting to see somebody take a scene that is supposed to be high drama and high action and then kind of update it to modern standards. That was cool.
It is almost inexplicable why they didn't put more effort into the choreography of that scene. If these two are supposed to be masters.
I honestly think it was before like big fight choreography was really a thing.
Yeah, I don't know. They were contemporaries of Bruce Lee. I mean, watch an action movie from the 70s.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you there. Maybe that's just
maybe they were too low budget. They weren't into hiring Hong Kong's action directors yet.
Yeah, it was a blind spot for George Lucas until they did the prequels. That was the only good scene in the prequels, was the freaking the fight with Darth Maul.
Okay, so let's get into a fight you and I have never gotten into before.
Wait, hang on. We did it. Spoilers for Star Wars.
Which is the best of the 3?
Best of the 3, what, Star Wars movies?
Yeah.
Duh. It's Empire Strikes Back. Of course. The second chapter of the 3-act plot where all is lost and it's the darkest point for the heroes.
Yeah, definitely. For me as a kid, that was not true. I loved Empire Strikes Back. I mean, Return of the Jedi. It was just everything to me. It was the happy ending. It was the Ewoks. It was the resolution of the romance story. It was the culmination of Luke's training. It was fantastic. I loved Return of the Jedi.
No, man, there's nothing that beats snow speeders like tangling up AT-ATs. It's just too cool.
But then they had the speeders through the forest on Endor.
Yeah. Well, I'm not... listen, we can both have different favorites. We don't have to agree.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so I want to take another time out and kind of talk some more about the role of films. Like your teacher said, that films are the novels of our time. If you go back to something like Roman or Greek myths, you have these ways of interpreting them. You have functionalism, which is like... They serve a function in our society to shape society and our social behavior, or humorism, which is that myths are distorted accounts of historical events, or allegory, where myths are ways of trying to explain natural phenomena that happen in the world around us.
Why am I in an English 202 lecture all of a sudden? Where are you going with this?
Star Wars has so many of these elements. You have the hero's round, the monomyth, you have the family drama and the good versus evil and all these themes that just I can't even think of these ideas without thinking of Star Wars.
Okay. But I mean, if you want to boil it down, there's a reason that we have movie genres. There's a reason that we have movie tropes. It's because we keep retelling the same stories over and over.
Yes.
Because these are the stories that resonate. These are the stories that we love.
Right. So if you were an ancient, Greek, and they're like, oh yes, consider the story of Achilles. Like, That's what we'd be like. Well, consider this the tale of
Neo.
what is the meme? Yeah, of Neo. Great example. Is that your next one?
It's on my list, yeah.
All right.
All right, so that goes kind of back to my love of sci-fi. Was The Matrix came out in 1999. I was a sophomore in high school, and it just it felt groundbreaking to me. Like as a kid that saw every movie in the theater that I possibly could because I had the time, and it just so Keanu Reeves. At the time I resonated with Keanu Reeves, and I was like, man, I really like this movie, and I really feel like I want to be this character, and I didn't realize that Keanu Reeves was the perfect character for this role, and that he is supposed to serve as like kind of a blank slate for the viewer. The reason he doesn't have a lot of over-the-top emotional reactions to anything in those films is deliberate. They want you to be able to like replace Keanu Reeves with yourself as you're watching these films. And just this radical idea of, I guess not really a radical idea, the idea that you are special, you are the one that's going to save the universe, that has existed forever. But they just told it in such a great sci-fi, different-y way that I just could not get enough of that movie.
Yeah, and it was so pioneering in every way. I mean, there was the bullet time and the kung fu action scenes and the sci-fi costumes and the alternate dystopian future. And wow, yeah, that one really was good for me too. I enjoyed that one.
Have you seen the new one, Matrix Resurrections?
No, I haven't actually, which says something because it's been out for like a year now, right?
Yes, I just recently watched it because I had a bunch of time last week. We didn't talk about this, but I had COVID, and so I spent several days catching up on a bunch of movies that my wife has never wanted to watch.
Wait, what?
What? You knew this. Come on.
I know, but I meant to make a bigger deal out of it, and I forgot. Josh, you gave me such a hard freaking time on this podcast when I caught COVID, and you got it, and I cannot let this go.
Okay. You caught COVID when, like, it was the height of COVID, and it was like, stay in your homes, wear a mask, don't talk to other people, and that's when you got it. I got COVID now when it was like, oh, CDC is like, oh yeah, you're fine. Don't even wear a mask. You're good. You're vaccinated, you're boosted, go nuts. And I did. I went nuts for one weekend, and I freaking caught COVID.
Do you know where you got it?
No, because it was the weekend where we went to a baseball game, and then we went to a rock climbing gym, and then we went to our local game store, and then we went to a Buffalo Wild Wings.
I love it.
Yeah, we had one weekend where we just did all the things, and one of the things we did was get COVID.
Okay, but everyone's okay? I assume everyone in your family eventually caught it?
So I isolated myself as best I could, but then my daughter got it, and then she was sick for a couple of days, and then my son got it. And my wife has felt like mildly ill for the entire 2-week span.
But she's never tested positive?
She's tested negative the entire time. She's taken a COVID test at least once a day for the last 2 weeks, and she just...
So your son and your wife didn't catch it?
No, my son got it, yes. And
he was okay?
Yeah. No, the kids recovered. This is the thing. It completely knocked me out. I was incapable of doing anything for like 3 full days. And my daughter and my son were like sick for maybe 12 hours, and then they were back to being just normal.
Okay, that's good. So you talked a bit on this podcast about how you had maybe inadvertently instilled him with a little bit too much fear of it. So when he actually caught it, was he like afraid he was going to die? Actually,
no, it worked out really well. And I think the fact that I had it first and I was just sick for a while, and then my daughter had it and she was just sick for a day, I think that really kind of took the edge off of the fear. Because then he got it, and yeah, he felt crappy for a day, but he wasn't afraid for his life because he had seen 2 people in his immediate family just like, oh, well, we're going to go into the sick room and watch TV all day and just kind of be miserable, but we came out of it.
Do you feel like maybe the vaccinations made it last shorter and the symptoms not be as severe?
I'm not a pathologist, so I hope so. Like, I'm going to give you...
Did you lose your sense of smell?
That hasn't... All right, so... I'm told that hasn't been a symptom of the variants for like a couple of like a year now. Like that hasn't been a thing.
Because that was surreal to me, because I've gotten sick a lot of times in my life, but I've never had anything like that happen.
Well, you got the original OG COVID that was like really bad for you. Now all the variants of COVID that exist are more spreadable but less lethal.
As a good virus should be. That's by definition.
Right. The way that viruses work, it would select for the ones that are more contagious and less lethal.
Right. Yes. Okay. Wow.
All right, what were we talking about before you had to shut me down about this?
All
right. So yes, I sat in a room for 3 full days catching up on a bunch of movies that I wanted to see but didn't.
And you watched the new Matrix movie.
I watched the new Matrix movie. The only thing I'll say about this is Neil Patrick Harris's back must be sore from carrying that film.
Okay. Good one. All right, I want to throw in some oldies. I'm going to go way back because my parents were big fans of the classics. So they kind of filled our lives with live action movies like Mary Poppins, which is pretty well known. But I'm going to list a few that aren't quite as well known. Have you ever seen Bedknobs and Broomsticks?
I have. We actually watched that not too long ago on Disney+.
Okay, I recommend that one. Bedknobs and Broomsticks is interesting. It's kind of a World War II fantasy. And as a kid, I didn't get that. I didn't understand the war or the context or anything of it. It was just one of those Disney movies where like real life people interact with cartoons and it's kind of a fantasy and it's interesting. But at its heart, Angela Lansbury plays a woman who's studying witchcraft and uses it to defeat the Nazis.
Who, let's be clear, is studying witchcraft by mail because like that's what she did back then.
From a fly-by-night con man who's sending her pages out of a book and he thinks it's all a sham.
Who was Mr. Banks in the Mary Poppins, the original.
Yes. I can't remember that actor's name, but I watched that one a lot as a kid, Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
As a kid, I can only ever remember that last scene where all the armor came to life and was fighting the bad guys. And that's all I remember of it. Watching it as an adult...
Oh, come on. You had to have remembered the soccer game.
Okay,
where
yes,
there's just
you're right.
this insane, off-the-hook, like violent soccer game between the animals of the elephant and the alligator and the hyena, and oh my gosh, it was hilarious.
I think there was a lot of borrowed animation from the Robin Hood animated movie in that one, in that scene specifically.
And the Jungle Book.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, that one's a classic. I enjoyed that one, Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
Okay. All right, I've got a couple movies that I want to bring up. This is going to be a little taboo, a little risque, and I hope you're okay going there with me.
Sure.
So there was a couple of films that I saw when I was a very young man that stirred feelings in me that I didn't know what these feelings were at the time. I have since become very familiar with these feelings, but I have to bring them up because, that's the human condition, right? This is all of human history.
Yes.
can be described in men trying to attract women. And so the first time I can remember feeling strange and not understanding my feelings watching a movie was the old animated film Sword in the Stone. You remember that one?
Yes. Are you talking about the squirrel scene?
Yes, I'm talking about with the squirrels. And I don't know why, but like as a kid, I was watching this girl squirrel get super into our protagonist, the King Arthur, as a squirrel, and just being confused by the feels that I was having at the time.
Well, as was he.
Yes, like he didn't know what was going on either. And like, I don't know. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Okay.
The other one...
All right, you said you had a couple.
The other one that was big was, and I think more than just me is going to resonate with this one. You remember Aladdin, our 1992 animated classic?
Uh-huh.
In the third act, where Jasmine is wearing the red outfit with Jafar, and then she straight up, in a Disney movie, tries to seduce the villain as a distraction.
Did something turn on inside of you?
I just remember wanting to watch that scene more like I was overly fascinated with that part of the movie, and I didn't know why at the time.
Okay.
And it was just it was that inflection. Like there is a frequency and a tonality that a woman can do to her voice that will remember the Rescue Rangers where Monterey Jack would
yes.
smell cheese and he would like float off the ground and go floating towards the cheese?
Yes.
If a woman takes this tonality of trying to attract a man, like I will,
Jafar.
my feet will leave the ground and float towards that person every time.
Yes. Okay. So I put Aladdin on my list for Robin Williams' classic performances, The Genie, but I could see that. Just before that, in the Disney Renaissance of the late 80s, early 90s, the movie The Little Mermaid fell at a critical point for me, where there was the scene where all she needed to happen was a kiss. And to me, that was the extent of sexuality when I was 12. But there's the scene in the lagoon where the music is happening and it's Kiss the Girl. And I remember this was like when the fire first started to light for me. And I was like, wow, if I took a girl with me to go watch this movie, maybe she'd kiss me. And I really thought that was exciting. So that was...
I'd like to point out that
the seashells probably helped too.
The prince found a mute girl on the beach who had just turned 17, by the way. And like this whole movie, we're rooting for the prince to marry an underage girl. Like it's weird. You go back and like some of the details don't hold up very well.
Yeah. In fact, let's stay on this for a minute because I enjoy that the internet has done this where they're using modern wokeness to reimagine fairy tales of the past. Yeah. And there's a like 2-panel comic where Prince Charming happens across Snow White in the woods and she's sleeping and he goes to kiss her. And then he goes, no, that wouldn't be consensual. And he leaves her and then it shows her as like a rotting corpse.
That's the right thing to do. Kids, if you see a sleeping woman in the middle of the forest, don't harass them. Don't assault them.
Right. No sexual assault.
No,
please.
Not at all. You can check on them to see if they're okay. That's fine. You know what? I will stick on the Little Mermaid for a second because this was actually an important movie in my life for the stupidest reason. And do you remember a technology called Laserdisc?
Yes, I've used it.
Before DVDs and before Blu-rays, there was a technology called Laserdisc where they were the size, like they were enormous.
They were the size of a record.
Yeah, actual vinyl records, and they were made of glass, so they were easily scratched, really heavy, and very fragile. And my dad thought this was going to be
not very data efficient. Like
not at all.
To watch a long movie, you had to like turn it over and have 2 of them.
The Little Mermaid, there was a side A and a side B for the Little Mermaid on our Laserdisc. And this is the thing, my dad went all in. He's like, Laserdisc, this is going to be the thing. And he bought a Laserdisc player, which was enormous, twice the size of our VCR. I can only cringe at what it must have cost. And the only Laserdisc that we owned was The Little Mermaid.
Only one?
The only one. Never bought another one.
What?
I don't know why. Like I wasn't.
That's insane.
I wasn't the financial decision maker.
Did you rent them sometimes?
I don't think so. I think that was the only Laserdisc we ever used or had.
Wow.
Right?
That blows my mind. Tim, you got some splaining to do. I want to hear the Laserdisc story next time I see you.
We also had a big screen projection TV. Ben, oh man, that screen was so small and so thick.
Okay, and did it have those like ridges on it? Like if you scratch it, it'd make that zippy sound?
Yes, it had those. It had wood siding. Like, all right, this TV was so big that my dad had the genius idea that they cut a hole in the wall that went into the master bedroom closet and sunk the TV, like not even the whole TV, just the projection part.
Your dad was living in the year 2010.
Yes.
He had a flat panel screen on the wall before that was a thing.
Oh, no, he cut a hole in the wall and sunk the TV until the point where it stuck out into the next room, and it still stuck out from the wall a full 18 inches.
18 inches isn't so bad.
Oh, man, it was so old school and great.
So I was the oldest of 6 kids, and it was me and then 4 sisters and my brother. So sometimes, like you'd mentioned the conflict of monopolizing the TV. Sometimes it had to be a compromise. So some of the best movies in my house growing up were the ones that I liked as a boy because it was an adventure, but the girls liked for the girl reasons.
Okay.
And it was kind of gendery that way. And one that kind of hit the sweet spot was Disney's Cinderella. Came out in 1950. to me, the wicked stepmother was not the antagonist of that film. To me, it was Lucifer the cat. I mean, he was named after Satan.
Oh yeah, everybody hates that stupid cat.
I still hate cats because of Lucifer the cat. But it had the adorable mice and their adventure, and it had Cinderella and her just desire to be something more than what it looked like she was going to be. And of all the Disney cartoons, I think I remember that one the most fondly.
I played Prince Charming in a rendition of Cinderella in my middle school plays. Yeah.
The carefree prince with a foot fetish. Is that how you played it? What were you going for?
It was middle school, so I barely remember. It was called Cinderella Wore Combat Boots, and I was cast because I was tall, I think is why I got that part.
The story of Cinderella is an interesting one in that if you study the fable, it kind of transcends societies. Just this idea that kind of the relationship to the feet and the family relationships and the fantasy of breaking out of the class structure and a lot of different things. I think its origin comes from China. And they have a lot of culture surrounding the size of women's feet.
Yes. I had a high school English teacher who spent a whole month talking about the weirdness of the size of feet in Chinese culture because we watched and read the book The Good Earth. Yes, I just read that recently. Seriously? Why would you read that recently? That book is terrible. It's so dumb.
I kind of liked it.
It's about the plight of middle-aged sustenance farmers in China, and they make
in the early 1900s,
and they make a point about the foot binding that they did in that society to make women's feet smaller. And I get it. Every culture has the things that they value in aesthetic beauty for both men and women. But why? That book was so bad.
I enjoyed it anyway. The point I was making about that is that this cultural myth kind of transcends or even has transplanted into multiple cultures and takes on the form of whatever culture it's in. But at its heart is this idea of someone who has a dream and wants to exceed the bounds of whatever limitations society and their family situation has put on them and ultimately is able to do so.
Well, I mean, and that's one of the stories that we keep telling ourselves over and over because it's always relevant. There's always going to be some circumstance that society says is normal that you want to transcend. It doesn't matter what time period or what society you live in. That scenario exists always and forever.
Well said. Another myth that tends to get repeated is the Robin Hood myth for similar reasons. I have two versions of the Robin Hood myth on my list. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, starring Kevin Costner, which is sometimes panned as campy and overwrought, which I love anyway because of its beautiful music and epic tale. But the version of the Robin Hood tale I'm going to tell you about right now is called The Court Jester. Have you ever seen this one?
No, I don't think I have.
This is a family classic. It came out in the year 1955. It's starring Danny Kaye. I'm sure you've seen something starring Danny Kaye, if it's some classic Christmas movie or dancing movie of the past.
God, I hate Danny Kaye.
Oh, man. Well, then you would love to hate this movie.
Danny Kaye, nobody cares how well you can tap dance. Stop it.
So this is a Robin Hood story that you can tell was mostly filmed on a soundstage in Hollywood. And the conflict is this classic Robin Hood conflict where they're trying to usurp the throne that was unrightfully stolen by some ill tyrant with ill intentions that are not clearly known. And he's leading he is a peon in the band of rebels.
You're changing it up, man. You don't even remember.
No, I'm not changing it up. He's a peon in the band of rebels who is known for his ability to entertain the troops. He's not the leader. He's not the head. He's not Robin Hood. But through a loony series of circumstances, he ends up in the position where he's the one that can save everyone. And it is such a classic. It's a masterclass in acting. He's called the court jester because he infiltrates the palace as a pretending to be the entertainer to the king, who's unrightfully sitting on the throne. And he's a clown, and he's incapable. And ultimately, there's a witch that bewitches him and convinces him that he's the greatest sword fighter who ever lives. And he has one of the most epic Hollywood sword fights you've ever seen. Oh my gosh, I love that movie. I love the songs. I love the acting. I love the story. I quote it constantly. My family has watched it 100 times. Please, if you're interested in a 1955 Hollywood musical, this is the one to see.
This sounds like, okay, so my wife is super big on those old-timey movies like that. And old-timey...
Nicole, you've got to see The Court Jester.
She's big on those movies that were made when Hollywood thought that tap dancing was the pinnacle of entertainment. And boy, howdy, does that drive me nuts. One of the movies that we have to watch, the only one that she forces us to watch on a recurring basis is White Christmas. Which...
Yes, Danny Kaye's in that.
I'm aware. But the movie's like 3 hours.
He does no tap dancing. Well, okay, maybe only a little bit of tap dancing in The Court Jester.
So the movie is way too long. It's way too slow. It's not entertaining. And but it's such a great classic Christmas movie. I'm like, why? It's barely about Christmas. And at the same time, I swear, I've probably said this on the podcast before. I think the movie...
You have?
I think the movie White Christmas and The Holiday Inn, I think those movies were filmed at the same time and just edited to be two different films.
Yeah. Well, I think you would enjoy The Court Jester. It is hilarious. One of my favorite gags that they do in it is the witch knows that he gets challenged to a duel by a man who's a big beefy knight, and he doesn't stand a chance against this guy. And so the witch, in order to help him win the conflict, poisons one of the goblets that's going to be used for the toast at the beginning of the conflict. And she tells him a rhyme to remember which goblet has the toast, and one of the spies from the other side overhears it. And so he's trying to remember this rhyme as he's going out to the toast, and the other guy does too, and they're both chanting this ridiculous rhyme to themselves, and they're messing it up, and they're walking out, and there's the goblet, the pellet with the poisons, and the chalice from the palace, the vessel with the pestle has the brew that is true. And they're messing it up. Oh my gosh, it's so funny. I love that movie so much.
All right, well, I'm going to take us in an entirely different direction.
Okay.
So I think every kid on the planet goes through an eco-terrorist phase.
What?
There is a point in every person's childhood where they are a die-hard avenger for Mother Earth. And they are taught about recycling, and they're taught about pollution and climate change and how we are destroying the planet and only we can fix it.
Okay.
And I went through this phase, and I remember the two movies that kind of drove me into this. And the first one was the animated classic, and in no way is it actually a classic, Fern Gully.
What?
Do you remember
this? Is on your list?
This is on my list of influential movies. Why?
Yeah, of course. Because Fern Gully is the exact same story from Dances with Wolves and Avatar and
Pocahontas.
Yeah, it's just colored by numbers. Guy from another culture crosses over to the other side and sympathizes with them, and then whatever.
And it's terrible and stupid. And Robin Williams is in this
Gully,
one too.
The Last Rainforest.
Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest.
Yeah, he plays the kooky sidekick, I'm sure.
He plays the bat that had scientific experiments done to him, and he has a radio antenna in his head, and he's constantly tuning into random radio programs that are happening that alters personality.
Yeah, they were just trying to find an excuse to just let Robin Williams off the hook, like in Aladdin, but it didn't quite work.
The movie is so cringe going back. Robin Williams does 3 minutes of a rap song. It's really, really bad, this movie.
3 minutes.
But but it's a very eco-terrorist kind of message that is sent. And as a kid,
eco-warrior.
There you go. And I felt out of that movie, we are destroying the rainforests, and we have to stop this. Where is all the oxygen going to come from? Point in fact, most of the oxygen comes from algae in the ocean, but we're not going to go down this road.
we didn't seem to have a problem with just turning children, mindlessly pointing their attention to false causes. Just we don't care that they actually have factual information. Just we want to point them at things. And
again, like I said, I'm pretty sure every kid goes through an eco warrior phase. And the other movie that drove me into that was Free Willy. 1993.
A classic, to be sure.
A classic. It's a stupid movie about a kid and a whale. Like there's something.
I always just think of the Michael Jackson song, but yeah.
Like I remember this movie being like such a huge influence on me of like just like these poor animals and we have to do more and I want to bond with nature. But looking back, all I remember is the freaking whale jumping over the kid on the rocks.
Yeah, it was supposed to be jumping over a dam. It was really amazing.
Oh, and then the eye. The whale opened its eye to actually look at the kid, and it had this like weird colored eye, and it was supposed to be this big special bonding thing with the Native American that was his mentor through this journey.
So that was an interesting thing that I think's been a theme in a lot of these, dating back to Roman and Greek mythology. You know, this idea of bonding with animals. Growing up, it was Lassie or Flipper or Mr. Ed or, we have these animals that we kind of imbue with human characteristics and let them be the heroes, but also show our connection to the world and to nature.
They had to line Mr. Ed's gums with peanut butter to get him to flap his mouth like that. So this poor, like, think about licking a peanut butter jelly sandwich off the roof of your mouth. That's what this poor horse had to go through every day whenever they needed B-roll of him talking.
I bet he stood really still for them to put the peanut butter in his mouth. I'm sure he was very happy about it.
No horses were harmed, but they were severely annoyed in the making of this film.
All right, I want to talk about a milestone of mine. I don't know if you remember what the first movie you saw in theaters was.
Ooh. Nope, probably not.
I wouldn't say this was necessarily the first movie I saw in theaters, but my parents weren't a watch movies in theaters. We weren't that kind of a family. But I remember one time when I was about 8 years old, I had a friend that says, "Hey, we're going to go to the movies. Do you want to come?" And I said, "Please, Mom, please, can I?" And I said, "Okay." And I went to the theater and saw Rocky 4.
What a random Rocky to see in the theater.
Rocky 4 was the one where Rocky goes to Russia and fights Ivan Drago.
Oh, okay. I thought for some reason in my head I thought that was Rocky 3. No, but if you're going to see a Rocky, that's the one to watch.
It was America versus Russia.
Yeah.
And he was the plucky guy who runs through the snow and carries logs while Ivan Drago's like doing steroids and attached to a punching machine.
Yes, I remember the montage where he's just in a barn in the woods somewhere doing sit-ups. And like, there's got to be a better way to do this.
Yes. But for me, this was kind of a milestone just because it was my first exposure to cinema the way it was intended to be consumed. Up to that point, I just watched VHS cassettes on a bad, CRT TV.
Okay.
So this was kind of a big deal. It really felt larger than life to see Sylvester Stallone punching whatever his name is, Dolph Lundgren.
I actually have a movie kind of like that. So my parents took me to see a drive-in movie. This was like one of the earlier memories that I have of like going to see movies. It was a drive-in theater. And it was Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Really?
Yes.
You didn't bring that one up on your short list of movies that awoke something inside of you?
It is on my list. I'm actually looking at it right now. I was going to bring it up earlier, but it's just funny that it ties in so well. This movie was another one of those. All right, so two things happened in this movie. One, it was another one of those sneaky horror films where the very last scene like really fuels nightmares. The difference between this one and the Tremors, what I talked about earlier, is I really think that this instilled nightmare fuel in me for my entire adult life. And so there's a scene, like spoilers for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, everyone, if you care about a 1988 film with Danny DeVito. But at the end, the bad guy, who is Christopher Lloyd, I think, he is run over by a steamroller, like in a very
in slow motion, like it was horrific.
It was, and it wasn't. It wasn't in a realistic way because his organs didn't spew out of his head like a tube of toothpaste, which would actually happen.
He was a human that they were exposing as a cartoon. So up until that point, you thought he was a human.
Right. And so here's the thing is he looked like a human and they steamrolled him and they did the steamroller like a cartoon because he was totally flat after that. But it wasn't gruesome or gory. It was just a dude that was flat. But then they did this thing where it was like stop motion animated where this flat photorealistic Christopher Lloyd stood up and was like kind of curled from having been under the steamroller thing. And Ben, I think that has fueled my absolute fear of body horror for the rest of my life. The stop motion
of getting run over by a steamroller or
just
the flat.
Just the idea of a person. I don't know, like just that's a whole.
So do you have a problem playing like Paper Mario?
Oh, for God, get off of the 2D thing. No, I'm talking about body horror. This is a genre thing where in horror movies where they like severely disfigure a person and like that's the antagonist or the bad guy.
Okay.
So like there's those Japanese movies where like the person will turn their torso 180 degrees and run on all fours or something. Like stuff like that still goes straight to like the fear button in my spinal cord.
What year did Who Framed Roger Rabbit come out?
1988.
Okay, yeah, So I was 11 years old when that came out, and it was a huge cultural phenomenon. It was a big deal. It came out in theaters in the summer, and it was the big summer blockbuster. All the toys at McDonald's were about it. There was ads all over TV. I mean, I could not get away from them, but I didn't see it in theaters when it first came out. I didn't see it for a few years after that. But I've recently kind of revisited it through this genre on YouTube I'll call like reviews of the past. And I saw this one, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It was absolutely brilliant. And it talked about people who undergo creative endeavors and do things the hard way because they know it makes them better. And there's this scene where Eddie's wrestling Roger Rabbit in a closet. And at one point, one of them bumps the light bulb. And the light bulb in the room swings around as they're wrestling in this closet. And the video talks about how that really complicated everything. The lighting, the interaction of the human with the cartoon, the animation of the cartoon, but how that little detail was an example of how these guys were just willing to do whatever it takes to make the best possible thing they could.
That's really interesting.
And they used that metaphor to talk about other things like that. They call it bumping the light bulb.
Okay, so that's like an industry thing now.
Yes, and I would say Top Gun Maverick bumps the light bulb when it comes to their aerial combat. It's just incredible. Another movie that I think bumped the light bulb that's on my list is Toy Story, 1995.
I have a good story about Toy Story.
Like, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that a Toy Story changed everything. And it was because they were bumping the light bulb.
That was the first real, like, full feature-length CGI.
The first feature-length CGI, yes.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just an exercise in special effects. It was a masterclass in storytelling that happened to be in CGI.
Right. And that's the thing, is that they told a good story and they just used a new media or a new technique or filmmaking or whatever to tell a good story.
But they didn't shy away from the hard stuff. They weren't afraid to bump the light bulb.
Technologically or storytelling wise?
Yeah, I mean, just some of the scenes, like at the end, at the very end of the movie, they're like driving a movie. They spent the whole time like in Andy's bedroom, and now they're like shooting rockets and driving through the neighborhood. Like they had to render like every leaf on every tree in that neighborhood.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the same time, that probably wasn't. I don't know. I've been watching a lot of visual effects YouTubes and like the different techniques and stuff that they use. And so, yeah, while it was still computationally hard, if you go back and actually watch the original Toy Story, like it feels old. Like the CGI was good at the time, but we've come a long way since then.
All right. Well, I want to go back then to the very first movies that use CGI. Tron is one, and another is called The Last Starfighter. Have you ever seen The Last Starfighter?
Oh, man, I have super vague memories of The Last Starfighter. This was the kid that was really good at the arcade cabinet. And then it turns out the arcade cabinet was like a recruiting or a training simulator, and he got beamed up into outer space because he was so good at the video game.
Yes. Yes. Every kid's fantasy, right? Getting good at video games. Now I can save the galaxy.
Haha. That actually happened because I played a video game professionally in the Air Force for several years.
And you saved the galaxy. So I loved this movie as a kid. It wasn't fantastic, but it was good. You know, it was the classic hero's round with this reluctant boy from the trailer park who wanted to escape. And instead of just escaping the trailer park, he escapes the planet. He goes up to, and he gets offered this life as a starfighter to defend the galaxy against Zur and the Coda Animata, and instead turns it down and goes back to the trailer park. Well, while he's gone, Zur attacks, and he becomes the only remaining starfighter and now has no choice but to step up and save the galaxy. I want to say something. I'm not going to recommend this one. You can watch it if you want, if you're interested. And it can't be 80s sci-fi with, very dated special effects, but it was because it was one of the first movies ever to have CGI. But I am saying, I'm predicting that this will be one of the next movies to get a legacy sequel.
Oh, okay. Did they leave it open-ended for that, or do you just think that that's IP?
Not
that
really.
It's
that.
Got it. One of the only other things I remember from that movie is at the very end he pushed the "I win the battle" button. I remember he was like severely outnumbered by enemy starfighters or something. He's like, "Oh well, I'm going to use this super special thing," and he like hit a button, and the really bad CGI spaceship just like turned into like a blender and was spinning in every direction at the same time and shooting out lasers. It's
called the Death Blossom, Josh.
It's called the Deus Ex I win the battle despite the odds button.
They set up the tension exceptionally well because when he hit that button, it expended all of the weapons and energy, which made them helpless. So he couldn't use it until the last possible moment. Otherwise, they would have been helpless against any remaining aircraft.
That doesn't change the fact it was a bad Deus Ex, man.
Okay. Well, since we're back in the 80s, I assume everyone has seen The Karate Kid. That was a big one of my youth. And yeah, it ended up going on to become a trilogy, and I watch all of those. But the original is just so pristine, and it does stand up well. So well, in fact, that it's become a hit series that was originally on YouTube, and now I think it's on Netflix. I think the final season just came out. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet.
Boy. Oh, Cobra Kai. I think they made a whole show about
Have you been watching it?
I have not, no.
No. But I remember as a kid thinking Daniel was so cool, and every time I get bullied by a bully, I'd imagine that I could learn karate too, and that I could use it to solve all my problems. The times my mind was absorbed with punitive violence.
Martial arts are supposed to be about becoming one with the universe and very zen
thank you, Miyagi-san.
Energy. It's not about combat. It's not about exacting revenge on the bully, Ben.
Okay, we're getting towards the end of our time. We need to go for a speed round. So do you have any left on your list that you want to recommend that you haven't said yet?
The only thing that is left on my list is I have one note, and it is every Disney movie. All of them. My parents, we had VHS because that was the age that I grew up in, and we had those giant VHS racks that you had to buy from the store that were, 10 tiers of shelves dedicated for VHS cassettes. And like one whole set of those shelves was full of those giant padded, extra-sized Disney VHS cassettes. And just freaking all of them, Ben. We had all of them.
And you watched all of them? Like, were there any that you felt like were notably bad or really good?
As a kid, I remember liking some more than others, and then looking back as an adult, I realized, oh, that's because the one I didn't like was a soulless cash grab trying to capitalize on the other ones. Like all of the Aladdin sequels, like what is it, Return of Jafar or whatever. I remember enjoying it a little bit, but it was clearly one of those direct to VHS nonsense things that Disney did back in the day.
Yeah. I felt like my mom was immune to those soulless cash grabs. Somehow she saw through them, but they were designed to kind of prey on those mothers. Go, oh, I liked Aladdin. I'll like Aladdin too, and it looks just like all the others that I have on the shelf at my house.
Honestly, we were as a kid. I remember not caring. Like I didn't have the same standards for storytelling and 3-act structure and character development and dialogue that I do now. It was just, look at all the cool stuff on the screen. I have vague impressions of liking one thing more than the other, but with absolutely no tools to articulate why.
Okay, so I have 6 more that are on my list that are recommendations. I'm going to do them rapid fire here. One is from 1968. It was one of the Dean Jones live-action Disney movies. This one's called Blackbeard's Ghost. It's set in a small town where there was an old inn that was owned by Blackbeard the Pirate. And it's rumored that his ghost still haunts the place. Anyway, Dean Jones awakens the ghost of Blackbeard and becomes haunted by him. He's a small-town collegiate track coach, and hilarity ensues. I love this one. I'm sure it's on Disney+. I recommend it. Speaking of hilarious live-action movies, the film Clue is another favorite in my house growing up. Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't.
Best movie ever made based on a board game.
Oh, that's a low bar.
It's a murder mystery set in a house. It has Sigourney Weaver, Tim Curry, just a who's who of just really classic, understated, great comedic actors. Madeline Kahn. Oh man, it's fantastic. It was kind of controversial at the time because they did something revolutionary in the theaters where the film was filmed and it had 3 alternate endings, but they would only release a print of it to a theater with one of the 3 alternate endings.
Oh.
And so depending on what theater you went to, you would see a different ending than your friends did. So you might get together and try to talk about the movie, and they'd be like, that wasn't the ending I saw. And it was kind of controversial because really the best way to do it is the way it was on the VHS when it came out, where it just showed you all 3 endings in succession.
I don't know. I kind of like the idea of having a different experience at the theater depending on where you went.
Yes, it was a revolutionary idea that was ahead of its time. It didn't quite work out. Wasn't well received necessarily at the time, probably for that controversy, but man, it's great. It's hilarious. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. If you haven't seen that one, what the heck are you even doing? Watch Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
There is nobody that listens to this podcast that has not seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
The Hunt for Red October, I put on my list. Sean Connery, Alec Baldwin. It was the height of Tom Clancy Cold War era fervor. What a great movie, and it led to all the Harrison Ford, Tom Clancy partnership movies that I just loved and ate up. So yeah, definitely recommend that one.
Can't get enough of Jack Ryan being underestimated by military superiors.
Another one, if we're talking about like movies that are probably better as a stage play, Oscar, starring Sylvester Stallone. Oh, and Marissa Tomei before she was Aunt May in the Spider-Man franchise. Have you seen Oscar?
I have not seen Oscar.
Oh my gosh. Okay, Oscar is a crime boss who swears to his father on his deathbed that he will go clean. And then there's a whole bunch of personal circumstances surrounding things trying to pull him back into the mob world. And it's all set in his house like a stage play. Marissa Tomei is his daughter. And it is fantastic. It's a classic stage play farce where there's all kinds of crazy things happening and misunderstandings. And it is hilarious. I don't know why it wasn't well received in theaters. It's fantastic.
You know, Marissa Tomei did a lot of stuff before she was Aunt May, right?
Yes, but she is so good in this, you might not be able to forget it. Like, when I saw her as Aunt May, I look at her and I think when she goes, oh, but Jimmy, dang, I can't quote the line. She plays a whiny teenage daughter of a mobster who's pretending to be pregnant so that she can get married.
Sounds like a wholesome film.
So she can get out of the house. It's fantastic. And my final entry on my list, and I put this on my list, on my recommended list, probably because this movie enchanted me so much as a kid. It was an adventure based on a classic television show starring Harrison Ford, and it was The Fugitive.
Oh, man.
I mean,
good movie, but it's so long.
I saw this in theaters probably 7 times. And considering I was paying for it out of my pocket with minimum wage, I mean, this was like a big deal to me. I loved the story. I loved the adventure. I loved the conflict. I just loved this one so much. Such a classic piece of cinema. Even the sequel wasn't that bad. So let me go through my list one more time. Starting in 1993, The Fugitive, 1991, Oscar, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, The Hunt for Red October, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Clue, The Last Starfighter, Tron, Blackbeard's Ghost, and The Court Jester. If you haven't seen any of those, check them out.
All right, there is one that I want to add to your list because I thought for sure you were going to mention it, but you didn't. And that has to be The Shawshank Redemption. That's one of those movies that's on cable all the time, and buddy, if I'm flipping through the channels and I see Shawshank Redemption, I'm stopping. Like, well, my afternoon just got shot because I'm watching The Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah. It's number 1 on IMDb's top 250 of all time.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's just... Okay, so back to what I was saying about films kind of filling this role in a society and being like, myths were to ancient Greeks and ancient Romans. The Shawshank Redemption just speaks to people, of the injustice of what happens to Andy and ultimately the redemption that comes in a way that is unexpected.
Everybody in their life, it doesn't matter what your circumstances are, you feel unjustly oppressed by some authority at one point or another, and it's cathartic to see somebody emerge and triumph over that.
Yeah, and it doesn't happen, like I said, it's unexpected. He doesn't get a good lawyer who helps him win on appeals.
No, he crawls through a river of poop and muck and came out clean on the other side.
He carves out his own redemption. Yeah, and based on a story by Stephen King and directed by Frank Darabont. What a odd combination of people. Morgan Freeman kind of hit maybe his quintessential role. And Tim Robbins playing almost like Neo in The Matrix, just this vague kind of flavorless everyman, so you can insert yourself into his position.
He was not flavorless, sir. He was an accountant. I want to bring that up.
That's great. Okay, so those are the movies that made me, Josh, and some of yours as well. What a great trip down memory lane. Go see Top Gun Maverick.
Tom Cruise sponsors the podcast again.
So there was something. So there's some things we do at the end of the show that I don't want to say have become rote, but kind of become a little bit automatic, and I want to try to get out of that a bit. I was listening to another podcast. It's a favorite podcast of mine, and every time at the end of the podcast, they ask you to go on to go on your podcast player and rate their show. And I'd never done it. And they kind of made an exceptional appeal for it. And so I actually went and I did it. I stopped what I was doing. I looked at my phone. I went to the show page and then I scrolled down to where the stars are and I put the stars, and then it asked me if I wanted to put a rating, and I wrote in my rating. And then I went and looked at hours for Bad at Magic. And we've had some great listeners that have gone on and done that in the past, but it's been a while. Josh, I don't know why, but it's been a while since anybody's rated our podcast at least on Apple Podcasts. So if you're listening and you want to help us, tell us what you think. Go on your podcast player, scroll down to where it gives you a chance to give rating and feedback, and do it. Really help us out.
Well, since we're doing things non-standard, I'm just going to reiterate the fact that there's a lot of different ways you can get in touch with us. Obviously, rating us on the podcast player of your choice is the preferred method. If you're hearing my voice and you haven't done it yet, please do. We'd love that. And you get extra bonus internet points if you can point out one of the logical fallacies that we've committed, because I'm sure we've committed several.
And until next time, try to be a little less bad at magic.